people say you've got to meditate in order to be in touch with your spiritual and psychic self. I think they say that only because it teaches you to quieten your mind.
I hear teachers, right? You're speaking of spirit guides. How do I reach my spirit guides?
Your intuition, your guides, your connection to source is a gentle, quiet energy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Messages from Beyond. I'm your host, Orly Alteras. Join me as we decipher signs, synchronicity, and the language of spirit. Let's begin.
I am really excited to have you on today, Kate. I'm excited because I'm so happy you came into my world and just the way things come about. For me, you've been a real teacher, friend, guide, all the things. And one of the things I want to do this year, I'm just sharing with you so you can get on track because we don't speak very often, but is to really put out the questions that are still that I still ponder, that I still think about, that I still, want to experience more of. And I think it's interesting when I speak with others, we're able to discern, right, information for ourselves, know what's true for me, take what
Yeah.
works for me, what's true for me, but perhaps hear another perspective and see where the similarities are the same. Maybe those are
Yeah.
true. And I'm speaking of just like we know that, right, chocolate is chocolate. Everyone knows what chocolate looks like. When we're speaking of spiritual things, not everyone gets to experience it in the same way. So I just want to hear a little bit about your experience and just dive in with questions and
Yeah.
hopefully
Perfect.
have a mutual conversation as well, like how I experience, how you experience, and just see where it goes.
Fantastic. Thank you,
Okay.
Orly. Thank you for having me here too. I love talking with you, so it's beautiful.
I do want to hear first and foremost what your first real experience, if we're speaking of, I will do the introduction, but you are a psychic medium. And so you've
Mhm.
had experience with spirit or with maybe beings or some kind of spiritual awakening. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about for you where you sense that there is more to life here, like more to life than what we actually see with our
Yes.
physical senses.
Yes. Well, I guess to go back to the beginning, I have always, even since a child, connected to spirit. And my first experience was I believed that my grandfather used to speak to me through my cat when I was little, and I was quite young. And when the cat would come to me in a particular way, I would think that my grandfather was in it and speak. And that has developed over the years. I've had different encounters throughout my life. And obviously now I work with them. But I feel that as I've grown, I've been more accepting of the different ways we can communicate within that spiritual realm. And so now, if I do have celestial beings come and visit me, I don't feel threatened or frightened. I'm truly able to just embrace their energy, the way they look physically, and the information in that moment. But I think, had that happened to me 20 years ago, I would have been frightened, just as I was initially when I used to have physical human spirit beings come and visit me, and I would see them. Initially, I was frightened
Mhm.
because it can be overwhelming. And also, I was unaware of my own abilities. So it took a while to come to an understanding that I had these gifts.
Mm. Did you share your experience as a child with anyone? Like, wouldn't it let, for example, were your mother or anyone to share it with, or who were supportive of what your experience, or
I always told my parents, and I don't know what my mother thought of it, but my father said, "I've said since you were born, Kate, you've been here before."
Mm,
And so he was always very affirming. They never dismissed me. And both my parents lost their parents at quite a young age. And my father had experienced, both when my mother's parents died and then when his parents died, different spiritual encounters. So
Mm.
it wasn't, so he knows or knew it was possible. And my mum knew it was possible, but not that she'd experienced it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm asking because I feel like when you're given that possibility or that it is possible, even as growing up as a child,
Yeah.
or maybe open to just believing that it's here.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's harder for certain people to connect because I don't know if it's conditioning or just being told that's not real, don't believe in that or something. It can close off that place that intuitively we kind of know in our heart, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
for me, there was a knowing I know up until a certain age where I wasn't even aware, right, that people pass away until that awareness came in. Like there was something in me that always felt like we're eternal beings. So I
Yes.
don't know if you had also this kind of just this kind of feeling inside always. I wonder if that's something you think everyone on this planet has an experience within in their soul that kind of knows that there's something more here.
I think it becomes clouded. We had experienced as a family a lot of death when we were young. Even now, I've still been to more funerals than I've been to weddings, and there was a lot of death, people dying, friends, and etc. So, and because my parents had experienced loss so devastatingly when they were young, Mum lost. She had no parents by the time she was 19, and then my father by, I think he was 25 or 26. So the way our family operated was to hold these people in our heart and know that they were somewhere else more beautiful watching over us. And whether my parents believed it, that's what we were taught. But I also think one thing that and I can't speak for living anywhere else, but in Australia, we're not a particularly religious country. It's the migrants that come to live here. It's our multicultural nature that has the religions operating within it. So I didn't have that church doctrine in front of me either about what it looks like when you die.
Mm,
For Australians, even though we're not significantly guided by our Indigenous people and not as significantly as we should be, we are certainly aware that our Indigenous nation, they believe in country and in spirit. And I think that does somehow underpin us. And so therefore that blockage wasn't in my way. I was free to move into that spiritual space.
and experience it maybe just without having any notion, like you're saying, in advance that was put there to think that it would turn up this way. I think that's a huge
Exactly.
thing of me also not knowing, or when I'm in least expectance, all of a sudden experience something. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's completely different in my mind than what perhaps is like shared in books or in history.
Absolutely.
Like, so I think that's really important to share that it doesn't necessarily, I mean, this was a big one for me too, that it felt completely different than what I thought it might be, or
Absolutely.
or what you think it's. That's why I think it's so difficult when people, for example, say, let's meditate or go within. Sometimes you're looking for a certain outcome, or you think that
Correct.
there's going to be a certain outcome, and it's
Yeah.
like, no, and that's also part of experiencing spirit is when you
Yeah.
actually let go of ego, right? And
Yeah.
are not expecting anything, where the biggest kind of receiving can come actually in. Where
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we've been told that certain people go to heaven and certain people go to hell, or there's that kind of, there will be, and whilst energies can feel very different, and it's very clear ones that
right.
are at peace and ones that aren't, it's clear that we aren't punished after our life.
Mm,
We are offered the opportunity to see life through a different lens. We're not punished. We're not sent to purgatory.
right.
And even with the celestial beings that come through, the energy is not and I don't know, I haven't explored this to the depths that is possible, but I certainly haven't ever had an experience that feels threatening.
Me too. Yeah.
It just feels so overwhelmingly loving
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That
kind, and
kind.
yes.
Do you think that's possibly because you're only allowing also that energy to? Because that's another thing I hear sometimes with you hear like, oh, there's dark, and I get this a lot asked also to myself, like, aren't you afraid? Again, it's the fear of like dark energy or like dark beings. And my answer is always, I don't know. I guess I connect only with the highest, or I'm always wanting to serve the high for your highest and best. And so I guess I don't allow those energies, or perhaps I don't land on those frequencies where my
Yeah.
energy, I'm very protective of it so that maybe they don't. But it makes me wonder, are there darker energies, right?
Yes. I've certainly experienced darker energies, both with myself. A house that I used to own came with a very dark energy of an old man. And it was interesting the way everybody that moved in and out of that house operated. But, and when I've worked with people that have had dark energies, and I'll use the word attached because that's what's used in the spiritual realm.
Right.
But when dark energies have come through, when you actually ask them, what do you need? What are you here for? What do you,
Mm,
it's often that they're just really sad
yeah.
and they're just needing that support and assistance. And there are people that talk about hostile energies and psychic sabotage. And I think those words are really threatening. And I think they're used to elevate people spiritually and make them superior to those they're teaching and those they're speaking to, rather than speaking of that there are some darker energies, but these don't mean they're demonic. It means that they're sad or unhealed or they haven't been heard and witnessed yet.
Mm. Do you think this is another question? Do you think that these energies could be aspects of ourself? And what I mean by that is like when a person comes in, for example, and you feel, let's say, because I've recently just experienced like a dark energy attached, right? And I'm like, we need to move that away. What is, and I could feel and sense that perhaps it is something different, but there's a part of me that also wonders if these are aspects of ourselves. And I'll add to this question in terms of spirit guides and spirit guides, for example.
Mhm.
My one of my questions when going within is like, are you an aspect of myself? Meaning that I have this one spirit guide that is very like loves books, right? And is very intellectual. Is this an aspect of myself, or is this actual a different entity? Right.
Yes.
And I'm
Yeah.
wondering for you, I mean, my answer from them was that they are a different entity, but they are also aspect. So I'm wondering how you see it. Because
Well, I see it the way they explained it, that they're a separate entity, but that they have come in to show me an aspect of myself or to help support me with an aspect of myself. So, for example, my spirit guides, I now have about 6 to 8 that regularly work with me, but they don't necessarily work with my clients. When I say, I'm bringing forward the guides that are working with me today, there's probably only 2 that come with me to work with the clients. The others are for me.
mm, thank you. Do you call upon them, or do you just let whoever wants to come in? I mean, there's a
Um,
relationship that happens, I know.
yes,
Like, sometimes
yes,
I feel like I wanna talk to a certain one,
yes,
or, um
yes. I've probably, I can tell even in my morning posts when I channel things who's coming through because the language is very different. There's a few that I call on often, and I do call on them when I am, and I probably not as much as I should because when I get busy, it's hard sometimes to create the space, but I do call them in. And I do have, like, I have a beautiful spirit guide, Violet, who has stepped forward because I have had such a focus on my health for 5 years. And she was a healer, like the first version of a nurse. And if I have a health issue, I ask Violet to come forward, and she brings everybody else in, but she leads the healing. And then all my other guides, I've watched them work with Violet as she instructs them to do certain things. And I know that I've got some that are working with me with regards to business and stepping into that realm of being seen and holding space. And then I know I've got some that are helping me articulate spiritual messages from source as opposed to the practical messages that a human might hear. And recently, I've had this beautiful light being step forward, and he's told me he's going to be working with me for the rest of my life. And so, yeah, I love the fact that they've grown and changed, but that you can bring forward a whole tribe and know that they're here for different aspects of yourself. I think that's incredible.
Yeah. Wow. In terms of I do want to go back to assisting people in experiencing this, because I know for myself, like for example, I'm sharing because again to show how it came in for me. But when my father passed, it was first realizing, okay, conversing with him and feeling it at a certain level. But I still wasn't experiencing my spirit guides, right? And my whole world opened up. I started asking questions like, because I hear teachers, right? You're speaking of spirit guides. How do I reach my spirit guides? And
Yeah.
one of the teachers I was with said, well, you have to meditate. I mean, it's like, and then I was like, well, I've always meditated in a sense, but he's like, no, really go within, right? And I started on my own without specific guidance, which again, I feel like is when you explore on your own, you discover things for yourself as opposed to again, but I think it's helpful when you get a little bit of help along the way. Like for him to
Yes.
say meditate, I was like, okay. And so I said, why don't I do what I do with my father, which is ask a question and kind of sense what I'm hearing and experiencing. So I put it out there. I put a question, just a big question out, and started again listening to that place where I was receiving from my father. And then one day all of a sudden I was like, one of the guides came in and was like, "I am," and he said his name, and I got chills, and I was like, that was definitely not I mean, it was an external experience, which I think is similar to the experience with speaking with my father, where I knew the difference that it wasn't my thoughts, but actually external thoughts.
Yes.
Um, and so can you go into a little bit for yourself how you've developed the ability to differentiate between your own thoughts and actually those that are not yours, one, but also what is it a practice that you have or that you started with to experience your guides?
Firstly, I want to say, and I hope that this doesn't upset anybody, but I don't buy into meditation leading you into this.
Mhm. Thank you.
I I don't get it. I don't know why it's become such a big thing that people say you've got to meditate in order to be in touch with your spiritual and psychic self. I think they say that only because it teaches you to quieten your mind.
Mhm.
I don't meditate. I don't have to meditate. And this is what I've got to go back, Orly, a little bit to say that
Yeah.
because I have always been psychic, I actually had to learn in reverse. I had
Right.
to learn what was not me and what was me, because I was always hearing these voices and feeling this energy. And I literally believed until only about 10 or 12 years ago, that is the way everybody experienced
Me
life.
too. I think thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that because I think that is the essence truly, and then I'll let you go. But that really, what you just said is so true because that is why for myself, for example, I kept because I thought everyone was experiencing this, right?
Yes.
And I didn't, I was like, wait a second, what? This is I could certainly put a time point where I understood all of a sudden how to decipher the language of spirit, where I was like,
Yes.
there was a point though, but then I realized that I was doing this, I guess, on my own, or again, I had to find the way, which is
Yeah.
why I was asking, how can I hone in on it more or
Yes.
extinguish or determine, again, differentiate between, because it felt like a lot of my own thoughts, right?
Yes. Yes.
It feels like, so sorry. So please continue, because it can be confusing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To know the difference. And this is why, and I talk a lot about in my work, listening to your heart, because your intuition, your guides, your connection to source is a gentle, quiet energy. And even when I first experienced it at 17, we were in a car accident and I knew the car accident was going to happen. And I heard, this is all I heard, sit in the back seat. I didn't hear a long story about why. It was a beautifully calm, but very directive, sit in the back seat. And then I just knew there was going to be an accident. So I did sit in the back seat of a car that was tiny, and I normally sat in the front because I'm nearly 6 foot tall. And there was an accident. Literally at the point where I thought, oh, we've made it. The very next corner of the mountain, we went over the edge. And had I not sat in the back seat, I probably would have gone through the windshield because I am tall and there wouldn't have been enough room. But why I'm using that to illustrate that point is, in that most dangerous moment, that voice was calm, loving, direct, and clear. Whereas the human mind is, should I sit in the back seat? Maybe I'll sit in the front seat. I like the leg room and I can play with the radio and And the moment I understood that my guides will only ever be kind and loving, and they will only ever tell me the truth, I suddenly could separate myself all the time.
Yeah. Thank you.
And
Thank you
and
for
it's
putting that into words. It's so that resonates completely with me, because I can call it my ego or my limiting thoughts. The
yes,
sensation was always that it's like putting myself aside, but I mean, there's a few elements to it, right? Some of it is your inner voice, your soul speaking to you,
yeah,
and then there are actual other beings speaking. I feel
correct.
like what you're talking about, I mean, it's wondrous to think, okay, I wonder if it was your guide speaking or if it was actually your inner knowing, your intuition saying those words. Because I feel like when your soul speaks to you, or your higher self, again, these words that everyone's using, it is soft, it's clear, it's like a whisper, it's very
Yeah,
gentle. It's always, a lot of times, it's like the insight that comes in, go for a walk or
yeah,
call that friend, or that thought all of a sudden that comes in, like, and then the friend calls, right? It's an inner knowing.
yes.
So for you, do you feel like it was a guide telling you that, or was that you?
Yeah, it
It-
was 100% a guide. I
okay.
feel it was my grandfather, who has been a guide for me with very particular aspects of my life, and always protection. And it was, and now I know the difference. My soul is even quieter. My
Quieter.
soul is
Yes.
more a nudge. It's almost like I can feel my heart open and my soul gets its hands behind me and gently pushes me. Whereas the guides are more directive. They do this. And even with this work and with changing from one job to another, I said, but how? And they said, do it and we'll show you. And I was like, okay. And that's where you can get to, is that, okay, I don't know where I'm headed. I don't know what it's going to look like, but they're just giving me one step at a time.
Thank you. I love that, because for me, sometimes it's even easier to hear other people's loved ones and just the guides, whatever the source giving me the information. Sometimes I don't even know which guide. I just sense that it's external. But for
Yes.
myself, I think for ourselves, sometimes it's so much more difficult to receive guidance for your own self unless you've really developed that relationship like you have with your guides, so that you can truly hear them for yourself. I think, but though, what I was what I really feel now is that's where, for me, synchronicities have come in.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what I mean by that is those little nudges and the little whispers that say, "Do this, go there,"
Yes.
and
Yeah.
those have led to these like miraculous, like all of a sudden I'm somehow meeting this person, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering for you, just you listening to their guidance, can you explain what synchronicity is or how you explain synchronicity or divine? In Hebrew, there's a word for it. It's called hashgacha pratit, which is like God is watching over you personally,
Yep.
and providence, maybe it's called. I don't know,
Yeah.
where there's a moment where all the pieces fall together.
I'm glad you raised synchronicities like that because I was thinking it might be angel numbers and I had another spin on that. But
Mm.
synchronicities, I would describe it as walking down a golden hallway with doors endlessly on either side, and one will open. And it's whether you have the courage to step forward into it and go on that journey, or whether you're going to walk past it thinking, this is not for me. Because if you have the courage to walk in that doorway, not knowing where you're going, I can guarantee you that it is opening up to a landscape that is fulfilling and beautiful. And what is so expansive about it is that when we've explored that landscape, then there are more doors available to us. And people don't realize that they fight against it. Every step of their being, they fight against it. And life can be, and I'm going to use the word easy, and I don't mean that therefore it's without suffering, but it can be so expansive and beautiful when you just lean into that energy.
It makes me want to cry. I have chills. You know how sometimes, again, it can come in that way too, like the chills, the feeling, I just you speaking, I feel it in my body, but for a long period of time, I'm like, this is truth. It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful because when you're how you're describing the doors, it's like what I understand and also is that there's a gazillion opportunities out for you. And when you're connected with your heart's desire and what you're wishing for, for me, it's almost an experience of the universe. It takes a little minute for it to gather the information so that those doors can be opened for you. And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
it's almost like a tasting table. Like, you want this? Here you go. You just have to jump on that opportunity that shows up and not fear it and keep going with the flow and take the next step.
Yeah.
Um,
And interestingly, people are so fixated on what they think their opportunity is going to look like or feel like. And so therefore the doorway might open and they'll say, no, that doesn't look like my doorway. But if you just move in, it's going to feel like your doorway. It's going to open up like your doorway. And it may eventually shift to look a little bit more like what you were hoping for. But we are so fixated on how it's meant to look that we forget about how it's meant to feel.
you know, do you think there's a little inkling of information that can help people make the decision, or because I understand that it's a feeling, it's like an excited feeling that you can feel very scared to do this thing or take
Yeah.
that step, but it's also really exhilarating. But is there something else you can add to that so that people know that's the path?
So I always say if it makes your heart feel perhaps scared but expanded,
Right. Yeah.
like, oh, imagine if I stepped into that. Imagine if I could get past this fear. Whereas if it feels physically heavy, like you're putting a wet blanket on yourself, if it feels like your heart has to close up, that's not your doorway.
Mhm. Okay.
But if you can feel that expansion, even through fear, if
Yeah.
you can feel that expansion, that's the way. And then you can discern that this isn't fear, this is excitement.
Excitement. It is. It's such a fine line also of paying attention again, paying attention to the feeling that you're getting and like asking yourself, even if I do that, will I feel excited ultimately? Is another way
Exactly.
maybe to feel into it.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, we're so used to ignoring the feeling and going with how it looks or how it or the perception or whether it meets what we think we need, that
Right.
we divorced ourselves from the spiritual compass that we actually need in order to move through these moments.
Yeah. I want to give an example of this because sometimes the whisper doesn't even have to do with the thing that you want or are wishing for. What I mean
Correct.
by that is, and that's why also I want to add, like when you're saying we think it's going to be a certain way and we struggle and like it's you get burnt out because you're doing when actually if you just follow that little whisper, it leads you easily, with ease, into the thing that maybe you didn't imagine, or you didn't know it would come about this way, or the thing that's actually meant for you comes about, but it always happens like very quickly and easily.
Yeah.
So, one example, just to, and I'm hoping you have an example of this as well. For me, one example I always share is that I was wanting to plan an event, meeting my I was on a visit in Israel. I wanted to meet teachers that I used to work with, and the putting together of the information of like, okay, I have to call each teacher now and get her number again and find a day. And should I meet her each one separately, or maybe I should make a gathering? And it got me overwhelmed and I let it go. And then the next day, after having that thought, I was about to meet a friend and she was running late and I was in the street and I had a whisper, right, that said, sit on the bench. There was a bench there. So I just went and sat on the bench. And like a minute later, the principal of the school drove by and texted me and said, Orly, are you in Israel? I see you sitting on a bench. Do you want to have a get together? And I'm like, I was just thinking this, yes. And within an instant, because all of the teachers' numbers were in her phone, she sent a message to everyone. Everyone agreed that the next week we'd meet on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, and it was done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I'm sharing is that sometimes that whisper or the listening to that, to the guides, the voice that comes in can be totally off. Nothing that you're planning and doing, like go for a walk because on that walk you're going to meet that person who happens to know someone who happens to know, right?
Exactly. And you've got to leave room for the universe to step forward. You've got to leave that space to.
Yeah. Well, first, maybe you have another example of that, but then the next question for me is, do you believe that everything is then truly divinely guided? Is there like a destiny that we or a fate or where we're supposed to end up and like because I know we have free will, right? So this is another question. How much does free will come into play and how much is God? I don't know, you could call it source, the universe, or is it just a playing field of like co-creating together? Like, how do you see it?
I see each of those things that you mentioned occurring, but it depends on the soul's evolution and journey. So, for example, your synchronicities that led you to there and mine that have led me to here, we've listened. So, therefore, we're on the journey of, and I don't believe I believe we are born into this lifetime with our soul's purpose. And our only obligation, in inverted commas, is to return to our fullest expression so that we can fulfill being that light that we need in our light, that we're born to be. How we do that, I don't think Source or the guides care. But so, for example, there might be 5 different occupations that allow you to live in your fullest expression, in your soul's purpose. So they don't mind which one of the 5 you choose, as long as in each occupation you are being your light, you are embodying your light. So I think that's where free will comes in. But at the same time, we are also free to stick our earphones in our ears and completely ignore everything, knowing that, well, people don't know. What will happen is you'll pass and you'll come back again to embody your light and your soul's purpose. So the choice is to be blinkered and come back. And that's why you and I, if you've gone into past lives, you can see how it plays out again and again, but you can release yourself of those restraints by embodying who you were born to be, the light and that expression that you were born to shine on the planet. And I feel that there is the shortcut version of listening to source and aligning ourselves with those messages, because source is trying to get us. They're trying to support us in learning what we need to learn so that we can come back to embody what we need to embody. Does that explain it? Yeah.
Totally. I totally feel that. And then that brings up a question. Do you feel that when a soul comes to its fullest potential or being in its full light, will it reincarnate back? Or like I have this question that keeps a lot of I've always asked this big questions, but I wonder if all of us were in our light, if also humanity would evolve to the next kind of level,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And like raise as though, and I think that's why it's so important for many of us to like, oh my God, like wake up or help each other out to reach so that, but do you think that's what it is, that we're actually helping each other come home, be in our fullest light because there is another kind of stage? Do you think that some people don't like, speaking of reincarnation, do the souls, again, I'm asking the same question, who have reached this kind of point where they're completely get it, let's say, and are living in their full potential, if they reincarnate again, where do they go from here? Or
I think some definitely choose to come back because they need to walk amongst us. And it is stepping into religious territory, but because I am not religious, this is where I've always feared to tread. I've gone where people fear to tread, is I think the story of Jesus was one of those people. He was just an evolved soul. And then people have taken that story and mushed it around over time to be something it wasn't. And I think even now there are people walking this planet that are evolved souls. And I think until humanity has reached a higher frequency across the board, we need those souls to keep returning to the planet and its people. And I don't think every soul chooses to return. I have some guides that have said, I will return, but it is not my time. And I think we return because we are all meant to experience ourselves. And I say in our fullest expression, but you might be in your fullest expression this lifetime, and that looks different in another lifetime because there's layers to that. And I think people that are, say, offshoots of divine source energy, because they are equally beautiful in their light and in their love, they're vital to our planet, particularly now, and always have been. And we can pick those people out, and people refer to people like Mother Teresa and Gandhi, and possibly. But I also think they're really ordinary people amongst us that lift up large groups of others and take them on their journey.
yeah, it makes me also think, thank you for that. It makes me also think of that for me also, there's an idea that this is just a playing field and we get to choose to come back, perhaps to learn other lessons. Like there could be a certain, like you're saying, lesson that I keep after learning and coming back and experience it again in order to like change my behavior or do something different in order to get past that. But also I think there's something fun for us in coming here to get to experience a different life. Or and so it makes me think, gosh, if I remember, right, if I'll be able to remember how to do what I've learned up until this point and come back in a new body, but don't forget, and just then
Exactly.
experience. And so I think that I'm like holding on to it now, not to forget. I think so that I can come back and like remember at 3 years old, right?
And imagine if you were born and rather than moving through childhood and gathering limiting beliefs and doubts about yourself, imagine if you remained limitless. You're in your own awareness your entire life. How extraordinary your impact could be in so many areas. And that's where I think we are evolving
Yeah.
to.
And also to experience then, and which is another question, I probably put it here in a certain form, but the idea of what you believe is what you experience. And so if you're coming limitless, there's a point where we'll be able to experience these beings, you could call them guides, actually living with us, or
Mhm.
just for everyone to experience seeing them, which is one stage perhaps, because they are just living amongst us, I think. I think they're not
Yes.
far. It's not like you're reaching to this realm. I feel like, because I've also experienced, right? I keep wanting it more because it was so beautiful, but like a blue being, right? Or just more miraculous encounters with like the phenomena of, or, and I also think they're showing up more. They're literally, we can see them more. Like I guess another term is like the veil is thinner, where they
Yes.
want us to experience these things. And so I wonder, like, maybe that's the next layer of being able to see them amongst us. And then my question is, so this is a two-part thing, because this is exactly where, because we are eternal beings. We obviously, the soul doesn't die, it just moves on. And so if we are eternal beings, we're able to see eternal beings. Now I've lost my train of thought, but in this place of experiencing eternity, which is just, what are your thoughts on that? On the experience of eternity, of eternal beings living?
I think absolutely there is our soul comes back again and again to experience its own growth. And I feel that these beings are coming through now to show us vibrationally where we can evolve to. So they're not, and I know there's a lot of talk, particularly in the States too, about UFOs and coming through now in spaceships. But my experience is they don't need the spaceship.
Right.
You know,
Thank you. Now you reminded me of the next question. Go
yeah.
ahead. Continue. Yeah.
So my experience is that they're showing us that I'm not sure if the spaceship is actually reality because they're appearing in my room and they're and I'm not discrediting people that feel that they've had those being taken on a spaceship, and that's a whole other story. But my experience with celestial beings is that they are another iteration of a soul. They are showing us how souls evolve into
Ah,
love and into spirit. And they're showing us the limitlessness of what love can achieve. And what connection can achieve and how we can transcend time and space and that we can all in the end we are all the same, like we are all the
the
same,
same. Yeah.
and it's magnificent. And within this, and this is a side note, is that it bothers me. I don't have the experience of light beings coming to me and telling me conspiracy theories about what's going on within the planet. I don't, when the light beings come to me, they speak to me, for me, about my own evolution. They're not waving the flag of warning about Earth's destruction or demise or.
And with that being said, because I've also experienced like that, but for me, it came in two forms. One was where the being came into a human for a moment and delivered its message and left. And one was me experiencing a human and actually feeling, oh my God, for example, this is actually, it feels like Archangel Raphael, for example, like an angel, but in human form. And so my
Yes.
question is, do you believe that angels come in a human form? Are we actually walking amongst angels? do the beings use our body and leave? Like, it, maybe it's just the way we want to see it and experience. And that's why I, for example, am experiencing it this way because my mind can make sense of it.
Yeah,
Um,
Orly, that's what the way I see it is that some people, it's easier to receive the information if they're in human form, if they're in a body. It's less threatening than the big blue being or the really long-headed being, that because that can just their physical appearance can feel uncomfortable for some people, particularly if you're not able to be really present with your heart open and not feel threatened. It's a normal human reaction to want to. So I think we experience these people the way we are most comfortable experiencing them. So I'm sure, and it would be hard for me to know, but I'm sure that in the past I experienced them in human form, but now I don't need that to feel comfortable. I'm okay with however people show up or beings. And I've seen when the angels come down, I've seen their wings, and I can call them in to my clients and I watch the wings wrap round the client. And
do you see it in physical reality or in your mind's eye? Because which is
I can
another
see both.
both. Okay.
Both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because for someone starting out, and maybe this is how I mean, we could go on and on. It's fascinating, but for someone starting out, for example, I speak of this too. It's the sixth sense, right? Which is clairvoyance, clairaudience, is that they can use our senses or our visual. We can see things in our mind's eye or receive information in our mind's eye, which might be perhaps like easier on the body to experience that than actually see now an alien standing, right? Or
Yeah.
a being or an angel with its wings.
Yes.
I do think that it has to do with, I mean, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's why I'm limiting myself, thinking that it's about my openness, and like I'm putting a limit on myself by saying I'm not open enough, or because I've experienced that at certain levels. Obviously, there's still fears there or something.
Yeah.
But for me, for sure, it's through the clairvoyance and seeing. So for someone starting out, how would you describe, or what is one practice that you would recommend? Because we did start talking about meditation at first.
Yeah.
What's one way that you have found that can ease into going into experiencing something spiritual or speaking with guides, or that external experience, which is not necessarily something supernatural or
Yes. Uh, so I feel like you have to trust yourself in order to begin this process. So if you're not trusting yourself, you can't get there. But then I actually find automatic writing really great for people with regards to bringing through guides and all different energy. I think that it's a process before you begin to see, and I don't think everybody's a seer. So I think that you have to first be able to trust yourself. Then the reason I like automatic writing is you then have to be able to trust what you've written on the page, that it's come through, channeled in that way. And then I think you're ready to start asking for your guides to step forward so that you can witness them. I think there's a lot of pressure on people thinking they need to see or experience things visually. And again, it's hard for me to say. I have all the clear senses. And I experience different things in different ways. But some people just don't see. But that doesn't mean that it's not a powerful
right.
message.
Yes, because I for example, I believe that we all have our own unique abilities,
Yes.
and that someone who hears, like a musician, for example, their clairaudience could be really strong, but they don't necessarily see in their mind's eye. So, you know, doing the visualization or perhaps trying to see it in their mind's eye could be more difficult, but they could really hear spirit, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we're all just different. We vibrate at a different frequency, each of us, and then that makes me wonder. And I guess maybe this will be the last question. unless you have 5 more minutes. But
Yeah, I've got
in
5 minutes. Yeah.
okay, in terms of, do you believe that we all have actual psychic abilities, that we're born with it, everyone? That's what I do believe, that we're just not, we don't learn it at a young age to be able to understand that we're telepathic, that we can communicate this way, that we have actual gifts that we can utilize, that we're not even touching the smallest of abilities that we have, and healing abilities. Again, everyone having their own kind of perhaps unique ability and gift in this world, which is, again, we've put labels on the jobs and descriptions, but like if we were all just walking with this knowing, maybe, I don't know. What are your thoughts on, is
I I
everyone psychic, or how come some people are and some people don't get to experience seeing spirit, or
I think we all have the possibility to, but maybe not necessarily in this lifetime. And I say that from the point of view that there are people that are so bound up in their wounds and in their human experience that they aren't able to cut through the human experience to get to the spiritual experience. And they can, but they're not shown how. And that's why, and until they come round to that spiritual path. And I don't know whether you all experience this, but I find even within my work, people will say, well, I'm going to a therapist, and then I went to a Reiki master, and then I've been to a kinesiologist. But if you're not with somebody that shows you how to connect to your inner compass, your truth, your connection to source, then you can't drop down into that. And I think even with some psychic development, and I know that yours is different and more aligned with what they're teaching you how to do it without actually unblocking the drain that's getting in the way of receiving the messages. The human experience can distort the messages that are coming through. So I think that we can get to that place. We can all get to that place, and it's all possible for us. But I think the first step, or the starting point, as far as I see it, is unpacking your human experience so that you open the portal to
thank you.
that source energy.
Yes. I also think that part of the human experience is to release those layers. Like you
Yes.
could say in Kabbalah, right? It's like it's called these layers, or klipot, that we have, so that you become a vessel, or a clear vessel to receive, that and then you're walking. If you're able to connect the spiritual with the physical, and that coming into alignment, how beautiful is that? And it's clear and clean, and you're able to come about experiences in your life that you, as a human, but you know how to, again, because of this strong kind of inner knowing of how to pull back those layers. And
Exactly.
it's a learning experience to be able to not get stuck, like you're saying, stuck in an experience and not being able to get out of it, or
Yeah. Yeah.
overcome, or
And I think for me, and years ago, I used to consume a lot of spiritual books and spiritual teaching work. And the greatest thing that served me was that we are spiritual beings here for a human experience. So if we ground ourselves in the fact that we are spiritual beings, then we're able to push past
mm,
our human experience and remain connected to that. And therefore, I think there is possibility. And whilst we may not all be channeling our guides, we can be certainly guided by synchronicities.
and by the heart, or your heart as the
Correct.
compass.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the guides, I think whilst it's beautiful for me to know them all and know their names and etc., for me, that came much later. It didn't even occur to me to ask their names or to ask what they looked like. I actually didn't really care because I was just loving the information. And it was only when I thought, I'm going to deepen this with them, that I brought that through. And I think that all the connections prior to that are also impactful and beautiful.
Yeah. Do you think then that is the reason to have a spiritual journey is it easier when you have that access to this place? Again, not necessarily the guides, but I guess I mean, you have to go within in order to peel back those layers. I call it
Yes,
layers, but in order to do the work or the healing process
yes,
of working through life experience.
yes.
Um, and so the question is, what would be the reason or is this the way actually to have a spiritual experience or is this the way of going within is to the journaling, you're writing, you're automatically to hear your inner voice.
For me, it was automatic writing was powerful because I just it really worked for me.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by how even 6 months later when I'd look back, I was like, that happened.
Yeah.
That
I
actually
love
happened.
yeah.
And then I could move from automatic writing to and I say I don't meditate, but I do as I go walk to the sunrise every
Right, which is
morning.
the same way. It's just a
Yes,
different
yeah, exactly. And then rather than actually physically writing, I was listening for the information to come through. And so I think there are many different ways for us to begin this. I think the prescriptive nature that the humans have decided it needs to be is the problem.
okay. I
Yeah,
agree with that. I think it's you finding your own path. That's actually exhilarating to actually find your way of
absolutely.
connecting to yourself, whether that be walking in nature, listening to music, or just following the excitement of your heart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be baking cakes if you love baking. And in that moment, like I still, when I'm doing the dishes or I'm baking, the amount of information that flows through, because in that moment, when you're baking, you can't be across everything else. You have to be truly present to the baking.
Yeah.
And I think we all, and as far as I can see, the beauty of us as a planet, of us as a humanity, is that if we all lent into our own uniqueness, we would be instantaneously extraordinary.
Yeah.
But we're all so preoccupied with being like everybody else that we're dimming our own light.
I agree. I think if we allowed ourselves, we are in a reality where you have to survive, and money that's a whole other conversation. We won't go into like energy and what abundance is and all of that, but it puts people in states of stress. And so they're not allowing, I think, themselves or ourselves sometimes to explore because we have to get things done, or, the to dos get in the way of just experiencing life. And I think that also, to sum it up, is the beauty of being present because the presents are here in the moment where you're
Yeah,
receiving. It's being aware to all the gifts that are here and now, and also being in joy in the here and now. Because when you're present and seeing everything, and you can truly enjoy life right now, and from that joy, more joy just comes. It's just bringing yourself back into that place where the chatter in the head doesn't get in the way of the to-dos and the stress that can yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Come in. And I think that's the thing is that as you said, if we were able to shift our perspective out of the to-dos and the fears, if you're able to do that in that moment and be really present, we'll be shown the synchronicities we
yes.
need to get out of that muddle.
Yes, for me, I call it magic because I literally am thinking something and the answer is there. That's for me where like the angel numbers will come in or license plates where I'm thinking and I need the confirmation. It's like, there you go. You
Yeah,
just
yeah,
feel like you're riding, which is the universe, right? It's all in the moment. But thank you for reminding that too, which is when you're in the shower, people get their biggest ideas, right?
yes,
Because you're just quiet with
yeah,
yourself, and
yeah,
that's the place we wanna be in order also to open up to receive, I think.
yeah, yeah. And I also think in that, and I think I just channeled that we don't all need to be psychics, as in working as a psychic, to
Yes,
have an
thank you for saying
impactful
that.
life.
Yes.
It's your intuition is primarily for you and for the benefit of you. It's not that suddenly everyone needs to down tools and become a psychic medium or become a reader or a tarot reader or whatever it is. If you use it first and foremost for yourself, that is all we
All you
need.
need to do. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you for saying that, because that, for me, it's like where musicians write music from, and the people who are truly just a channel, right? But it can come in many different forms. Doesn't mean that we all are become psychic media. It's just they are a medium, and they are receiving the information, and it's flowing through the artist, who Van Gogh, who
yeah,
these beautiful pieces of art, music that comes into this world. I mean, how many beautiful creations. And I think the struggle is what truly, yes, when you get in your own way and stop that flow from happening, and it
yes,
just takes longer. And
yeah.
I think, yeah,
And because maybe, and I say this a lot to the people I work with, maybe you're just meant to use your intuition to be the best hairdresser or best doctor or school teacher or nurse. Like, imagine being guided by your heart in that space.
yeah,
That's powerful. That's really powerful.
yeah.
And it can feel just as beautiful. And I know you and I were both called to this work. Th-
Thank
th-
you.
Like
I do
this,
feel a sensation of, like, yes, I feel like it's a calling, or my nature is to, I don't even know, to just uh show the possibilities in a sense, or
yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah.
And for me, it was a process. I had a dream for 18 months that I was speaking one-on-one to people. And the dream kept coming and I thought, oh, okay, I'm meant to do, and I'd studied counseling 20 years ago when I was a teacher. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm meant to be a counselor. I'll go back to schools and I'll be a counselor. And then did the last few weeks of finishing off the course and I was like, that's not it. This doesn't feel
Feel
good.
right.
And so then I did a life coaching degree. This was during the pandemic, and I was like, yeah, it's nearly there, but it's not quite. And friends were saying, why aren't you starting your business? Why aren't you starting your business? Because I was still doing PR, and they were like, why aren't you doing the life coaching? And I said, oh, because I just have a feeling I've got to do something with crystals and tarot, and it's got to be more spiritual, and I don't know how I'm meant to do it. And I'm just waiting to be shown how I'm meant to do it. And for me, then it was tell everybody, all the friends on Facebook, that you're psychic, because some people didn't know. And I did that. And they said, and then just go with that. And then I got bookings through people from just doing that. So it was this is where you're going. Like, don't resist it. We're going to push you. Just keep following the dots. And that was my synchronicity. But I used my intuition just as much when I was a teacher in the classroom, identifying the kids that needed love and extra
Same.
help.
Yeah, I think that's where we have a lot of,
Yeah.
yeah. When
And,
you
and
were, yeah.
sorry, and in PR, the same thing, like ideas of this is how this project should look and this is how this business should look. So don't discount it. We don't all need to be psychic mediums. We can be doing beautiful things in other spaces.
Yeah.
Sorry, your
I
question.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering, when you were a child, what did you say you wanted to be? Did you have an answer for that as a kid?
I had an endless list, Orly. It was an endless list. I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to make hats for the stage and a florist. And
Same. I mean,
it was,
just, yeah, but I do remember teacher as being, just knowing or wanting that, just to, and which I was, right? I did end up being a teacher and teaching. I'm always drawn back to the teaching, no matter what. Like, for me as well, having a home decor shop, but then, and fascinated with heritage and stories woven it, right? But I'm still keep coming back to the same, like, studied. But that's another point, and we'll really end with that, is that I find that when you look back at your life, there's certain moments you truly remember, and if you, like, shine light on those, they illuminate the path you're on. Like, For example, I remember in 5th grade, this is one experience of being in a class, or 6th grade, with a teacher who taught us how to interview people, and we would write things down on a piece of paper and having the space between. And I loved that class. I loved
Yeah.
it. And all of a sudden now, like, I also had a dream about this, right? And not even having an outcome. I don't even know what the outcome is. I just know that my soul is happy,
Yes, yes,
learning, because I love learning. But it's interesting that, like, oh my gosh, that having that aha moment of like that teacher, and now interviewing, for example, people,
yes.
and it's like the pieces come together. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you also experience, looking back, how it's all woven to bring you to where you are now, where it's like makes sense in a way.
I can see how I've been doing the same thing in different ways.
Yes.
So I don't quite see that what you're saying, but for example, when I finished university, I worked in fashion and in styling, but also like in window dressing, like displays. And I would see the stuck energy in things, and I'd be, oh no, that's not right. If you have it like this and you have it like that. And then when I was a teacher, when I went into teaching, I remember saying to my uncle who'd been a teacher, I'm going to be a teacher because I want to teach children how to connect with themselves so that they can be all you can be. And he said, oh God, if you're going to be a teacher, don't, if you'll never be able to do that. Like, if that's your reason for going to be a teacher, forget it. And I wasn't actually a teacher for very long, like it's just under 7 years, but I literally taught every class with, I don't care what you're learning on the board, I'm teaching you to be a beautiful person.
Yeah.
And this is how you build your self-worth. And this is how you take confident steps. And, and don't ever let anybody tell you who you can and can't be. And then I went into PR with that same thread of,
Yes.
this is the essence of your business. This is how you can impact the planet. And this is what it will do for your people. So I see the thread. I was always, and
Right, the
now,
soul energy of who
yeah,
you
yeah,
are coming through
yeah,
in the different.
coming,
Yes.
yeah,
I also that, I feel that because ultimately I realize that I'm doing the same thing that I was
yes,
doing, or that I'm doing this my whole life. I think for me, it was just like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this like my whole life, right?
yes.
In different forms.
Only now it feels peaceful for me, and I'm
For
sure it
me as
does.
well, yes. I
Yeah,
feel like I don't know, it makes me so happy. There's
yeah,
just I'm just so happy, and in it, like I'm saying, like, yes, be doing one-on-one sessions, but also still teaching, and teaching people,
yes,
like you said, or that's what I did with the kids, like being their authentic self and tapped into their intuition, and acting, which is all about improvising in the moment.
yes,
And then realizing that all the tools we receive in acting is actually ways in which we are learning to use our sixth sense. Like, it
yeah,
was all just, but then again, seeing again in school kids and knowing each one, just feeling the energy and knowing how to like work in the room so that child is seen, or that he's felt, or
exactly,
all of that.
exactly.
It's like, but yeah,
Yeah,
when you're in your element, it definitely just feels good, which is just a way of knowing if you're
yeah,
on, if you're in,
totally.
and to pay attention.
Actually, and this is the first time in my life, because I've changed careers every 7 years. Literally, I've done everything for 7 years. Some things I've gone back to, but only for 7 years. And this is the first time I'm not in this thinking, because I'm 3 years in, I'm not thinking, okay, what's next?
I know.
It's the
Yeah.
first time I've not thinking, because usually I got to the 3.5 year mark and I would be dreaming about what I was going to do next. This time it's just like, okay, because like you, I can be in my fullest expression in this capacity. I'm still a teacher. I'm still healing. I'm still shifting energy. I'm still creating. This is how my soul can be most fully expressed.
I I feel the same. And it's, thank you for putting it in words. That's a true gift, I will say, just from my experience of you, Kate, a true gift to be able to articulate and put into words the experience just of life. And I think that's why you're so gifted too in sifting through the human experience and just being able to put it into words, because it's also yeah, uh,
Thank you.
I just, I love you so much. I'm so grateful you're here for teaching, for giving this expression so that I always leave being with you and feeling at peace.
Thank you
So
all.
I just feel again like I'm home and at ease and that everything's working in my favor and all of the, it just, and I know that I'm hoping that this will be of help to anyone who is experiencing, and just to answer the questions that we all hold, I think, still. So
Thank you, Orly.
thank you.
Thank you. It's just delightful to speak to you all. Yeah, I love chatting with you. It's
Okay.
been beautiful talking about all these things.